Hey traders, it's John Fortune here with this week's weekly Forex Forecast. I hope you're having a fantastic weekend. Last week was a great week for the markets we were looking at. I did tweet out midweek last week that the Japanese yen was at risk of catching a bid, and we did start to see that, and we saw some other signs coming into the scorecards at the end of last week of potential upcoming risk-off move in markets, and we're going to cover that in today's video. Okay, so just a couple of key upcoming events to note. We do have a US bank holiday on Monday. Very often the Forex markets tend to go nowhere when you have a US bank holiday, so don't be surprised if Monday is pretty dull. On Tuesday, we have the Australian interest rate decision we spoke about in previous videos, and this just means that I'm going to be waiting until the Australian interest rate decision takes place before trading the Aussie pairs. And I am interested in short Australian dollar plays next week, which we're going to discuss in today's video. Apart from that, there's not really much else we need to pay attention to in terms of short-term trading. We do have non-farm payrolls on Friday, so you may see the markets get a bit volatile on Friday. And if we jump ahead 1 week, you can see we have a New Zealand interest rate decision coming up, as well as a Canadian interest rate decision coming up. And recently, of course, the important inflation data out of the US. So just bear in mind, we do have these coming up, but they're not going to affect the way that I'm going to trade next week too much. And I am interested in New Zealand shorts heading into next week again, which we're going to discuss in today's video. Okay, so let's have a look at the scorecards heading into this week. And the Swiss franc retains its #1 long bias. And the US dollar again comes in at second. So I am once again going to be primarily focused on Swiss franc and US dollar long positions, which we looked at last week and in fact paid very nicely last week. The euro has weakened a bit, and the pound especially, you can see, again, when we're looking at these scorecards, the best signals we can get from this is when you have a weak currency getting weaker, as opposed to, say, the euro, which was kind of slightly bullish, and then it gets a little bit weaker. And also, logically, if you have a strong currency which is getting stronger. And although we don't have that in today's scorecards or the scorecards for this coming week, we do have the pound, which is weak and getting weaker, and we have the New Zealand, which is weak and getting weaker. So New Zealand shorts and pound shorts are going to be two of the primary things I'm going to be looking at. And I'm going to be looking to pair those with the Swiss franc and the US dollar primarily. So we are going to be looking at, once again, New Zealand franc in today's video. We're going to look at New Zealand dollar to the downside. We are going to also look at pound franc to the downside. We're going to look at pound dollar to the downside. The Australian dollar remains bearish at -2, so also going to be interested this coming week in shorting Aussie Frank and Aussie Dollar once again. These were markets which again paid nicely last week, because you can see we had the same score and we were looking at Aussie Frank, Aussie Dollar last week. And there's nothing to suggest that we shouldn't be looking for continuations in those pairs this week. And the final thing to note, and this is very important, is the jump off of the oversold rating. When we're -4, we're looking at oversold, and when we're +4, we're looking at overbought. That doesn't mean to go and short, or if something is oversold like this, to go out and buy it because you're just trying to pick a bottom. And as you've seen recently with the Japanese yen, for example, currencies can remain oversold like this for a fairly sustained period of time. So you don't want to be just going long when the market's short. This is actually saying the yen is extremely bearish, but when you get the market, such as the Japanese yen, coming off of oversold levels for the first time, you get a troughing, or if the market is overbought very, very strong, you get a peaking. This is indicative of a move, let's say, with the Japanese yen from right to left in the scorecards. So there is a very good chance now, and we had a ton of Japanese data coming out on Friday, which has altered the scores. And the data is now suggesting that on a 1-month forward-looking basis, the Japanese yen is at risk of a continued bid. And this is why going into this week, although the Japanese yen scores -2, I do not want to be looking at Japanese yen short plays like we looked at in last week's video. And I think the risk reward of getting involved in shorting the Japanese yen now just really isn't there for me. And the reason for that is because we've been extremely bearish in the yen. And if we do get some short-term covering, or we get a short covering rally in the yen, these can be extremely strong. You don't want to be on the wrong end of that. So I'm not interested in shorting Japanese yen this week, despite the -2 score. And the primary pairs we're going to be looking at in today's video are Aussie, yen, New Zealand short plays versus primarily the Swiss franc and the US dollar. Okay, so let's start as we always do, just by looking at the individual currencies first, starting with the dollar, and we're looking on the daily time frame so we can get an overall understanding of what's going on in the individual currencies. We are still above the 102.992, which have been highlighting for quite a while here as the major 7-year breakout, and it does look like we're set for further advances to the upside next week, and the US dollar is ranked as the second best long heading into next week. So I am looking for the 106.08 to be taken out next week, and you can see the uptrend in the US dollar. In fact, when we look through here, even the Swiss franc, this is the only market which is in a full-blown bull market as it currently stands. Next is the euro. The euro pulled back and retested the major breakout level of the 1.06710 again, which we've been highlighting recently, and it started to sell off from here. So any continued pullback next week is viewed simply as an opportunity to look for further declines down to the 1.0296. I am bearish on the euro next week, but because it scores +1, which is kind of bullish to neutral in the scorecards, it does mean that, yes, I am interested in looking at EurUsd to the downside, for example, but I think there are better shorts. I would prefer to short the Aussie, I'd prefer to short the pound, and I'd prefer to short the New Zealand before I looked at shorting, let's say, Euro Franc or possibly even EurUsd next week. So I am short on the euro, but I think there are better shorts than the euro next week. Next is the pound. I did highlight in previous videos that we just had simply a bear flag here, and any pullback in the pound, I was viewing this as an opportunity to look for shorts. And we have had a weakening of the pound from -1 to -2. So I am looking for further declines in this market. The next key area of support to the downside is the 1.1734. And pound shorts are one of my favorite plays heading into next week. Next is the Swiss franc. The Swiss franc, actually, if you look at it, it's not as bullish as the DXY overall. It is more bullish currently in the scorecards, but it's not yet in a bull market. We may be starting a new bull market in the Swiss franc, but as it currently stands, we're really in the early stages of that. However, going into next week, I am once again looking to be long Swiss franc, and I'm looking for a continuation into the 1.0625, and the primary markets I'm going to be looking at shorting versus the Swiss franc is the New Zealand, the Aussie, and the pound, as you can see over here. Next is the Japanese yen. Now you can see the Japanese yen is very bearish. We're still below the major breakout level of the 0.007945. So I wouldn't necessarily step in and start buying this right here. This would be trying to pick a bottom. But with the scorecards for the first time suggesting on a 1 month forward looking basis, we should be careful shorting Japanese yen. It means that I have taken the yen pairs out. So I don't necessarily want to step in and try and buy the bottom of this, but because we've had a troughing of yen weakness in the scorecards, and the scorecards are forwards looking, they're telling you what's likely to come within the next 4 weeks on a rolling basis, it does greatly increase the risk of a snapback here in the Japanese yen. So I am overall bearish on this, but near term, I'm very careful with shorts in the yen. And the troughing or the bottoming of the Japanese yen in the scorecards from oversold levels, that is a sign overall as well that we could be seeing more risk-off moves come into the markets as a potential flight to safety in the Japanese yen materializes over the next 4 weeks, let's say. Next is the CAD. The CAD is kind of neutral in the scorecards, and we do, as we're going to see in a minute, have crude oil kind of selling off. The Canadian dollar in and of itself is actually forming a potential bear flag, so I'm not particularly bearish on this, but I'm not bullish either. I am more bearish on balance, and if you are going to trade the Canadian dollar, I would prefer to be short the Canadian dollar, but I think there are better longs, such as the Swiss franc and the dollar, and I think there are better shorts, such as the New Zealand, Aussie, and the pound. So the CAD pairs are off the table for the time being for me. Next is the Aussie dollar. I am bearish on the Aussie dollar, and what I would like to see is I would really like to see a correction maybe heading into one of two things, either a correction heading into the interest rate decision and then a sell-off, and that would be the opportunity from Tuesday onwards to look for a pullback and a move down. Or if we get the raising of rates and we see a spike up like this, and then maybe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we start to flatline over here, look for the market to roll over and start to fade this for further decline. So either way, I'm only looking to be short the Australian dollar next week, but I would like to wait for the interest rate decision to come out first. And finally, New Zealand dollar, we did take out the target to the downside, almost to the pip highlighted in last week's video at 0.61590. Heading into this week, we do see a weakening of the New Zealand dollar. So the New Zealand dollar and the pound, because they are weak currencies getting weaker, they are my two favorite shorts. Aussie in third place. And so New Zealand shorts heading into next week are absolutely something I'm interested in looking at. Okay, so let's look at the markets themselves, starting with crude oil. Last week I was looking for further declines, and we did break out of this correction last week and we started to flag. So any continued pullback is viewed as an opportunity to look for shorts once again into the 98.76. And I do think crude oil is at risk next week of quite a decent sell-off. Doesn't mean it definitely is going to happen, but I can see crude oil is at risk now of a sell-off next week. So I am keeping my eye on this for further declines. The first Forex pair we're going to look at is New Zealand Franc. Last week I was looking for further declines in this market. It was highlighted as a top market to look for, and it is once again highlighted in gold as one of the best plays. We took out the target at the 0.59510, and we pretty much finished the week right at this level. So what I'd like to see going into next week is any pullback like this is going to be viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish reversals, and I'm going to be looking down towards the next key of support at the 0.5798. Next is pound franc. Again, we came down, took out the target set at the 1.1604. Heading into this week, I would like to see a correction take place first, and any correction in this market is viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish reversals and breakouts to the downside for shorts into the 1.1496. Once we break through here, you can see there is really nothing but air down to the 1.11190. So if we do break the 1.1496, we could see it come down here with momentum. We could see pretty sharp sell-off to the downside. So bear this in mind when you're trading this next week, but pound franc is definitely something we're going to be looking at shorting next week. Next is Aussie Frank, another market highlighted last week for shorts, and we did come down, take out both of these targets. Heading into this week, we are quite close to the next target to the downside. So I'd like to see one of two things. Either we pull back and we get some nice distance to the next target, and in that situation I'm going to be looking for a breakdown and a move into the 0.6487. But if we come down at the start of next week and we take this level out first and then bounce, I'm going to be looking down towards target 2 at the 0.6416. Next is New Zealand dollar, highlighted as a good short opportunity last week, and we came down, took out the target almost to the pit. That was the low of the week at the 0.61580. Heading into this week, any correction is simply viewed as another opportunity to look for bearish reversals down towards the next key of support to the downside of the target set at 0.6015. Pound dollar, another market highlighted last week and performing really nicely alongside the other markets we looked at, highlighted in gold. It is once again highlighted in gold, so any pullback in this market is simply viewed as another opportunity to look for short positions down towards the next key of support at the 1.1905. And the final top pair heading into next week is Aussie Dollar. We did take out the target set in last week's video. So heading into next week, any pullback in this market, and let's say we get a pullback into the interest rate decision and then we get a sell-off like this on Tuesday, I'm going to be looking for a pullback and further declines down to the 0.6684 over the rest of the week. But if we get a big spike up because they raise interest rates and you see momentum to the upside, I'm just going to be looking for this to roll over and fade over the subsequent days. I'm still only going to be looking for shorts. If we get a real explosion and this just continues to the upside, I will be out of the Aussie pairs altogether. I think that's highly unlikely. I think one of these two scenarios is most likely. And the final Forex pair heading into next week, not highlighted in gold as one of my top plays, but we do cover it every week, and I do think we're going to see further declines next week in euro-dollar. Any pullback in this market is simply viewed as another opportunity to start to look for bearish reversals down to the 1.0341. So I've just put the Aussie pairs here in blue to remind you that these are interest rate decision trades from Tuesday onwards. And the top four, if you take these two out, will be the New Zealand franc, pound franc, New Zealand dollar and pound dollar. Those are my top four pairs that I'm going to be looking at trading, and the markets which I think offer the absolute best potential to make money next week. Okay, so wrapping up the video with gold, silver and Bitcoin. Starting with the gold-silver ratio, I did highlight the 92.97 as the next key target to the upside, and that gold was likely to outperform silver. And this is why, although I was bearish on both of these markets, I have been highlighting silver as the best short. And in fact, silver shorts greatly outperformed gold shorts last week if you were taking them. So this just once again highlights the fact that I do prefer silver shorts over gold shorts, and if I am going to short one of these markets, it will be shorting silver as opposed to shorting gold, because you're likely to get a much better move and better profit potential from shorting silver than shorting gold. So starting with gold, you can see I am overall bearish on gold, and we did take out the target almost to the pip. That was the low of the week at 1789.28 last week. I do still, on balance, favor shorts in gold. So any pullback, if you are looking to trade this, would be viewed as an opportunity to look for further declines and bearish breakouts into the 1780.35. But I personally am not looking to trade gold right now because, as I said, I would much prefer to short silver. Next is silver, and in previous videos I highlighted the fact that 21.45 was a major breakout, and we should be looking further declines below this level, and we have now sold off, and this is what you can expect with all of these markets we've been looking at. I've said to you, we've got major breakouts, and for example the dollar index to the upside, don't be surprised to see this, but to the upside in the dollar index, all the time it remains above that major breakout level. So heading into next week, we took out both targets, finished the week right at the second target of the 19.66. This is absolutely an opportunity to be looking for further declines. What I'd like to see first is a correction and a pullback, some profit taking from shorts up in this area, and that will provide another opportunity to look for bearish reversals down to the 19.05. And last but not least, we have Bitcoin. I am still bearish on Bitcoin, and ever since we started to break out of this kind of contraction over here, you can see I said to you, this is an opportunity to start to look for further declines. I did warn the risk of the sell-off over here, and we did get this big sell-off, and I once again warned we could be capitulating, selling off quite hard in Bitcoin. However, that hasn't yet materialized like it did over here. So I am still short. You can see we did have a spike up here. This was where El Salvador bought the dip, quote unquote. So best of luck to them, but I am still focused on shorts. So any continued pullback in Bitcoin is simply another opportunity, as it was in this area, to start to look for further declines and bearish breakouts down towards the 16,492. So that is it from me for this week, guys. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please let me know by liking, sharing, and subscribing. A big thank you to everybody who does that on a regular basis, and a big thank you to everybody who has subscribed to the channel so far. I want to wish you all a fantastic weekend, and I want to wish you all the best in your trading next week. The only thing left to say is take care, and don't forget to trade safely.